G'day folks, and welcome to Gourmet's Shed. This week we're going to take a look at some polystyrene, and a lot of us use polystyrene to form our landscapes these days. Amongst other things, you know, people do it all sorts of different ways. I like to use polystyrene because I can put it down in blocks. The stuff I've got is about 2 inches thick, and I build it up in layers and cut it and shape it and all that sort of thing, and usually put a skin of plaster over the top. But I'm going to show you a couple of techniques today where you don't even necessarily need to skin the polystyrene if you want to get some sort of rock face happening or whatever. So I'll just show you those techniques now. It's fairly simple and easily accessible to all of us. So here we go. Right folks, I've just got a bit of polystyrene here, and I've used a hot glue gun and I've stuck it to this bit of wood so we can hold it in place there for the purposes of this demonstration. So what we'll do is we'll zoom in a bit closer on it, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. Now the first method is using thinners. Now most of us have thinners, and for our airbrushing. This is probably an expensive way to go about it unless you can buy your thinners in bulk. I buy mine at Car Spare Parts Place, and I get a big tin of it for about 18 bucks. So it's much cheaper to buy it. Like in Australia here, I buy it from Super Cheap. So all you Aussie guys will know about Super Cheap Auto, and it's a 4 litre tin of thinners. I was just checking the tin then. It's a 4 litre tin of thinners, and it cost me 18 bucks. It'll last me the rest of my life, I think. But anyway, yeah, what I've done is I've got some thinners, and I've got an eyedropper. So I'm going to put some of it in an eyedropper, and then we come over to the polystyrene here, and I'll just put a couple of drops on there, and hopefully you can see it starting to eat into the polystyrene, and it's sculpting it. It's a bit sort of random, but I guess random's okay. I'll put a drop up the top there, and a bit more there. And what I'll do is I'll see if I can zoom in a bit on this without losing the focus, and we'll see what happens when I pick that point there. Right, I'll just come over here and put some thinners on there. You can see it really eats into it. Okay, so we'll just let that dry a little bit. Right, and this is basically what we've finished up with here, and you know, you could pull a bit of it away there, I suppose, if you wanted to, but it gets rid of this I don't know what you'd call that effect when you cut through the polystyrene, but that sort of those sort of, it's like balls stuck together. It gets rid of that effect and looks a bit more like rock. Now if we got some paint onto that, it's still wet I think, if we got some paint onto that, that'll look pretty good. So that cancels out using plaster, but as I say, it's going to take a bit of thinners, and I don't know whether you want to spend that sort of money on making a rock face, but that's an alternative. And now I'll show you the other method. Right, the other method folks is with one of these heat guns. This is an El Cheapo one from our local Bunnings here in Australia, and if you're not familiar with these, the idea is that they pump out a lot of heat, and it's good for removing old paint from a timber house. You sort of work it along the paint and it bubbles up and you scrape it off. And there'll be a considerable amount of heat coming out of this thing, and it will react with the polystyrene and create some fumes. So this is probably best done in a well ventilated area. You know, if I'm doing it here, but I've done it before and I know what I'm up against, and I've got doors and stuff open, so it's got to be a well ventilated area, and you've got to be careful because these things get really hot. So operate safely and read all the instructions about these things. Okay, so we'll give it a burl and see how it goes. Right folks, I've got this on the low heat setting. As I say, they pump out a fair bit of heat, and hopefully we'll see some results here as I go along. So here we go. You see I'm sort of moving in on it to get a result, and then I'm backing away from it. I'll just pull the camera back so you can see that a bit better. That might be better. Okay. You can see how it starts to shrivel up, and starts to look a bit more like rock, I think. It only needs just a touch, because there's quite a bit of heat coming out of this thing. At this stage I'm not aware of any fumes. Right, that'll do for the moment. Now I'll just put this thing down, and then we'll give you a nice close look at it. Okay, so if I can zoom in. Right, so this is all in actual time folks, and you can see it's not a bad result. I mean, you can do something with that, you know, once you hit it with the paint and colour it up, and we might have a look at that next. Okay folks, I've just got a little bit of water in this jar here, and I'm just going to put some acrylic paint into it, a couple of blobs. This is burnt umber I'm using here. Looks like there's not much of it left either. Now it's going to be a pretty watery mix. That's okay. I'll just grab a stirrer from somewhere here. That'll do. And what we do is mix it up. It's too wet. Need some more colour in there. I'll add a bit more of something else into that. I've got too much water in there, but you can experiment with this sort of stuff. It's basically, what would you say? It's like watercolour in effect. I'll put some, what have we got this time? Oh, it's a different type of burnt umber, if that's possible. Put a good blob of that in because there's a fair bit of water in there, and I can use this stuff anyway. If I keep the mix, it'll come in handy later on. I've got some plastering to do, and this is sticking to the stick. How's that, eh? Sticking to the stick. Right, that's better. Now, as I say, it's a pretty watery mix, but that's good. It works really well on plaster, this method, but you should get a reasonable result on polystyrene. And because it's so liquidy, what it does is you dribble it on, and it finds all the nooks and crannies. I've got to find myself a brush now. Yeah, it finds all the nooks and crannies, and gives a sort of a random effect. So now we'll just move the camera over here to the polystyrene, and I'll zoom in a bit. Now I've got my brush and I've got it loaded up with this stuff, and as I say, I'm just going to dribble it on. It's good as a base, and it has, see how it sort of dribbles down. Get a much better result really on plaster, I would think. But this is a handy method, and it looks all brown and stuff there at the moment, but because it's a bit thin, you'll probably find it'll dry a bit lighter in areas and give a bit of contrast. Or you can whack another colour over the top if you want. You can see how quick it is because it's so liquid. You don't have to sort of push and poke too much to sort of get it to work into the area, and as I say, it'll dry fairly flat. You could even add some sort of sand onto this mix now, fine gravel or something if you wanted to. It would probably stick because of the paint, and we might even have a go at that too, just to try it out. Add a bit of contrast in there because it's all still wet. That'll do for the moment. I'll just grab my sand. Right, I've got some very fine sand here. It's got a bit of dark stuff in it as well, so we'll sprinkle some of that on there, just random, and just adds a bit of contrast here and there. Chuck a bit down the bottom. Right, that might, oh, we'll chuck a bit more on. Right, that might do. Okay, so I don't know how that looks on the camera, but we'll zoom in a bit more. You can see some white bits there, but that's easily fixed later on if we go over it. So really it needs time to dry there. It's looking all a bit shiny, but you can imagine that with a bit of grass and stuff growing on it. I think it's a pretty good result. Now folks, to add a bit more to it, I've got some burnt sienna here, and I haven't diluted this. I'm just going to put a few touches on here and there. I'm sort of dry brushing it on, just to add a bit, slightly different shade in there. Just to bring it up a bit more. Just random is good. Don't know whether this actually shows up on the camera because it's a pretty subtle difference in the two colours here. Not too bad. But anyway, you get the picture. You can sort of muck around with colours. You can add a bit more. We can try adding a bit of a darker colour in there. So this time I've got some black acrylic. I'm just going to put some bits and pieces on here and there, and try and sort of blend it with the other paint that's there, so it doesn't look like just a black blob. It looks like it's sort of a transition between the colours, if you like. It's really up to you what you do, and if you practice this sort of thing, I think you get better at it as you go along. That's starting to shape up pretty well actually, even if I do say so myself. I'll whack a little bit more down here. Oh, that's a bit too much actually, like a coal seam. But what we'll do is just add a bit more of the burnt sienna over that and sort of ease it out a bit. That's alright. Now as I say folks, when you get a bit of greenery on there, I reckon that shapes up pretty well. On the camera I can still see white bits in there, but I think that's some of that is white, certainly, but some of it is also reflection off the paint because it's still wet. So yeah, but you can always sort of poke away at those bits and they'll disappear. And there you have it, a very lightweight a very lightweight piece of scenery, and it won't crack on you like plaster does. So there you are, folks. It's as simple as that. It doesn't take long, and yeah, it's still wet, but you can see it didn't take much to get to that point. So there you are. So get out there and start shaping that polystyrene. I think it can be done with a hairdryer, but you'd need a hairdryer that pumps out a fair bit of heat. So that's why I've used that hot air gun. If you're looking for those in Bunnings in Australia, they're not very expensive. They're like 15 or 20 bucks or something like that, so not a great deal of money. But be careful, be very careful. They get very hot, and as I say, if you're doing a lot of this, you don't want any fumes coming off it. Work in a well ventilated area, very important. Okay, I'll leave it with you. What? Paint on my fingers. See you next week. Cheers, Gourmet.